That's better. Come up to the heater, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, before we move things about, Mr. Hale, could you please tell Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning?
By the way, has anything been moved? Is everything as you left it here yesterday?
It's just the same. Now, when it dropped below zero last night, I sent Frank over here to light a fire. And I told him to touch nothing but the fireplace. Well, you know Frank.
Someone should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. Well, when I sent Frank over to Morris Center to take care of that man who went crazy, I'll have you know I had plenty to deal with yesterday. And I knew you could get here from Omaha by today, as long as I went over everything myself.
Well, Mr. Hale, why don't you tell us what happened when you got to the house here yesterday?
Harry and I had started to town with a load of potatoes. We were coming along the road from my place, and as we got here, I said I'm going to see if I can't get John Wright to go in with me on a party telephone. We spoke about it once before, but he put me off, saying that folks talk too much anyway, and all he asked was some peace and quiet. I guess you know about how much he talked himself, but I thought maybe if I came to the house and talked about it before his wife. Though as I told Harry, I didn't know if what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Well, let's talk of that a little later. I do want to talk about that, but for now, please, go on with your story.
I knocked on the door. Still, all was quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. So I knocked again, and I thought I heard somebody say, "Come in." I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet, but I opened the door, and there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
And what was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleading at it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Well, like she didn't know what she was going to do next. Kind of done up.
How did she seem to feel about your coming?
Why, I don't think she minded one way or other. She didn't pay much attention. I said, "How do, Mrs. Wright? It's cold, ain't it?" She said, "Is it?" and went on pleading at her apron. Well, I was surprised she didn't ask me to come up to the fire or to sit down, but just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, "I want to see John." And at that, she laughed. I don't know, I guess you would call it a laugh. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," she said, unconcerned. "Ain't he home?" says I. "Yes, he's home," says she. "Then why can't I see him?" says I, out of patience. "'Cause he's dead," says she. "Dead," says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited, but rocking back and forth. I said, "Why? Where is he?" She just pointed upstairs, like that. Well, I got up with the idea of going up there. I walked from there to here. Then I said, "Why? How did he die?" "He died of a rope round his neck," said she. Well, I went out and got Harry. I thought I might need help. We went upstairs, and there he was, lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs where you can point it all out. For now, please continue.
My first thought was to get that rope off. It looked, but Harry, he walked up to him and he said, "No, he's dead all right, and we better not touch anything." We went back downstairs. She was still sitting that same way. "Has anybody been notified?" I asked her. No, she said, unconcerned again. Who did this, Mrs. Wright? Said Harry. He said it businesslike, and she stopped pleating at her apron. I don't know, said she. You don't know, said Harry. No, said she. Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him? Said Harry. Yes, said she, but I was on the inside. Someone slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him. And you didn't wake up? Said Harry. I didn't wake up, she said after him. We must have looked as if we didn't know how that could be, for after a minute she said, I sleep sound. Well, Harry was going to ask her more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell her story first to the coroner or to the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could down to Rivers' place where there's a telephone.
How did she react when she knew that you had gone for the coroner?
Well, she moved from that chair to this one here and just sat there looking down with her hands together. I felt like I ought to make some conversation, so I said I came to see if John wanted to put in the telephone, and at that, she laughed. Then she stopped and looked at me, scared. I don't know, maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. Soon after that, Harry came back, and Dr. Lloyd, and you, Mr. Peters, so I guess that's all I know that you don't.
Okay. Well, I'd like to go upstairs first, and then out to the barn, have a look around there. You're sure that there was nothing here of import, nothing that could point to a motive?
Nothing here but kitchen things.
Ah. Oh, here's a nice mess.
Oh, for fruit. Big freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire would go out and her jars would break.
Can you beat the woman? Held for murder and worrying about her preserves.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without the lady? Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, would you say?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done on a farm.
Oh, to be sure. And yet, I do know some Dixon country farmhouses that do not have such towels.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands ain't always as clean as they might be.
Loyal to your sex, I see. You and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends as well?
Well, I've not seen much of her of late. Not been in this house in it's more than a year.
You didn't get along?
Oh, I liked her just fine, but farmers' wives have their hands full of Mr. Henderson, and then,
Yes.
well, never seemed very cheerful.
No, it's not cheerful. Shouldn't say she had the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know whether Wright had it either.
You mean they didn't get along?
Oh, I don't mean anything. It's just, don't think a place would be any more cheerful for John Wright to be in it.
I'd like to talk of that a little later. For now, I want to get the lay of things upstairs.
Now, will anything Mrs. Peters take in be all right? We were going to bring in a few small things, some clothes. We left in such a rush yesterday.
Yes, that should be all right. But I do want to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and let us know if you find anything that could be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson? Oh, I'd hate to have men coming into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing. Of course, it's no more than their duty. Duty's all right. Oh, but I suppose that deputy sheriff that came out to make the fire might have got a little of this on. Wish I'd thought of that sooner. Seems mean to criticize her for not having it slicked up, but she had come away in such a hurry. She had bread set. Oh, she's gonna put this over there and... It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if there's any left. I think there's some here. That's all right, Mrs. Peters. Oh, yes. Oh, and it's cherries, too. I declare, I think that is the only one. She'll feel awful bad after all her hard work in the hot weather. Why, I remember last year when I put up my cherries. Goodness, it was such a lot of work.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. Are you coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You can help me carry them. My, it's cold in there.
Right as close. I think that's why she kept so much to herself. She wasn't even part of the Ladies' Aid. Well, suppose she thought she couldn't do her part, and then, well, you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. Oh, she used to wear such pretty things. Back when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. Oh, but that was 30 years ago now. Was this all you was to do, then?
Oh, she said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail, goodness knows. But I suppose just to make her feel more natural. She said they was in this cupboard. Yes, here. And then the little shawl that always hung behind the door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for her apron and her little shawl. Worried about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake up and they were slipping a rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale says. There was a gun in this house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what was needed for the case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. Oh, it's only quite fair. Wonder how they're finding things upstairs. Hope she had a little more read up there. Seems sneaking to lock her up in town and then come out here trying to get her whole house to turn against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
Suppose it is. Well, better loosen up your things, Miss Peters. Won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
Oh, it's log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
She wonders if they were going to quilt it or just knot it.
Well, Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
Don't know if there's anything so strange about taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get evidence. Don't see it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Miss Peters, look here. This is the one she was working on. And look at the sewing. Up till now, it's been all nice and even. This, it's all over the place. It's like she didn't know what she was about.
What are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Oh, just taking out a stitch or two that's not so very good. Bad sewing always makes me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
Oh, nonsense. I'll just finish up this end. Miss Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
what do you think she's so nervous about?
I don't know. I don't know if she was nervous. I sometimes sew awful queer myself when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. We may be through sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find some paper and string.
In that cupboard over there, maybe.
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Well, now, I don't know what she did. Not been here in so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries real cheap. I don't know if she got one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems strange to think of a bird here. But she must have had one, or else why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
Suppose maybe the cat got it.
Well, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room. She got real upset and asked me to take it out.
My sister Bessie was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Looks as if someone was real rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they were going to get that evidence, they'd hurry up and be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It'd be lonesome for me, sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? Tell you what I wish, Miss Spears. I wish I'd come over sometimes when she was here. Oh, I wish I had.
But of course you've been awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children.
Still could have come. Stayed away because it weren't cheerful. That's exactly why I ought to have come. Never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you can't see the road. Well, I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place and always was. Wish I'd come to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now that...
Well, you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow, we just don't see how it is with other folk until something comes up.
Not having children makes for less work. It makes for an awful quiet house. With Wright gone to work all day, no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Miss Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink, and he kept his word as well as most. Paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to spend the time of day with him. It's like a raw wind that went to the bone. I think she would have wanted a bird. What do you suppose went with it?
I don't know, unless it got sick and died.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her?
Not till they brought her yesterday.
She, come to think of it, she's kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. Oh, how she changed. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
Well, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if her patches are in here and her things.
Well, there's some blue, and oh, I expect this has got sewing things in it. Oh, what a pretty box. It's just like something somebody would give you. Better sorted things are in here. Why, there's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why, those aren't her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters,
It's the bird.
Mrs. Peters, look at it. Its neck, and it's all the other side, too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or knot it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. There's a bird?
We think the cat got it.
Oh, there's a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign of anyone having come through the door, their own rope. Let's go up again, Peters. We need to go over this again. There has to be someone
She liked the bird. She was gonna bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a girl, a kitten, there was a boy who took a hatchet. Before my eyes, before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it would seem never to have had any children around. No, Wright wouldn't like the bird. The thing that sang? She used to sing. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
It was an awful thing that was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man in his sleep, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him?
We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
There'd have been years and years of nothing. And then a bird to sing to you. It'd be awful still. After the bird was still.
I know what stillness is. When we homesteaded in Dakota, my first baby died. After he was 2 years old. And me with no other than...
How soon do you think they'll be through? Looking for the evidence.
I know what stillness is. The law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
Oh, I wish you could have seen her. Back when she was Minnie Foster and stood up in the choir and wore that white dress with blue ribbons and sang. Oh, I should have come around and visited her more. That was the crime. That was a crime. Who's gonna punish that?
We mustn't take on.
Might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. I tell you, it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live close together. We live far apart. We all go through the same thing, just a different kind of the same thing. If I was you, wouldn't tell her her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. Take this to prove it to her. She might never know whether it was broke or not.
It's a good thing the men couldn't hear us. Wouldn't they just laugh? And all stirred up about something like a dead canary. As if that could have anything to do with... Wouldn't they just laugh?
Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it all makes sense except for a reason for doing it. And you know, juries, when it comes to women, if only there was something to tie together this strange way of doing it.
Well, I got the team around. It's awful cold out there.
You know what? I'm not pleased we can't do better. You can send Frank out here, right? I want to go over everything again.
Oh, would you like to see the things Mrs. Peters is bringing in?
Yeah. Oh, they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out. And for that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
Married to the law. I want you to come over here just a moment, George. We ought to take a look at these windows.
Yeah, windows.
We'll be right out, Mr. Hale.
Well, no sign of 4th century.
No, there's not.
Well, at least we found out that she wasn't going to quilt it. She was going to, what did you call it, ladies?
We call it knotted, Mr. Henderson.